Up, guys? So here's a strategy I want to talk about for some of you who might be struggling with pacing during your test, and then you find yourself reading questions too quickly, and then you get into the middle of, section three, four, and you're just like, I feel like I didn't even pay attention to those last couple questions that I just went through. So this is something that I really, really struggle with. Especially like in the second half of the test, or even this can be applied to like when you start the test. Like if you feel like your brain is not there mentally when you're beginning the test. This is something that I use honestly on my real test, my practice test, that's really helped me. And this is called the do 10 questions and go back strategy, I guess. It's not so much of a strategy, more just like a technique you can use to kind of help you out. Now, I will preface this. If you are somebody who is constantly close to running out of time, or you're just on the cusp of like, you got like 5 minutes to spare, this video is not for you. This is for my people who rush through the test and still have like an hour, 30 minutes or so left that they're like, I feel like I rushed too fast. And when you're reviewing your test, you're noticing, okay, I'm making some really silly mistakes that I have no business making. So, what I tell people to do, let's just start with if you struggle with the first part of the test. So, this could either be like right when you get started with the test, like section one, or when you come back from the break in the middle of section three. So, what ends up happening is, you're starting the test out. You might be making some silly mistakes, and this is something that you'll only notice is a problem if you go back and review your practice exams and see, oh my, the first 15, 20 questions of each section, I'm getting like a good chunk wrong, and that's where the majority of my questions wrong are. Now, if this is you, then what I would suggest is do the first 10 questions of section one and then go back to the beginning. Like literally restart once you finish section, like question 10, go back to question one. Because by the time you get to question 10 or 15 or so, you're in the thick of it basically. Those initial nerves from like when you first start the test or you first get into the exam, those initial nerves have started to subside and you're like, okay, this I'm no longer, threatened or anything. Like I'm in my groove. Let me go back to those first couple questions and just make sure, like, now that I'm in the groove, I know what's going on. And you might notice there's like a moment where you're like, okay, like I definitely didn't mess up on this one because I misread this or whatever. And so you'll notice that now that you've kind of calmed down, you're less in a fight or flight kind of mode when you're going through it. You'll be able to read the questions better. Because I'm sure when you guys, I'm sure everybody's experienced this at some point. When you look at a question, you're like, is this even in English? Like, I feel like I'm not even understanding what's going on. For me, when I first started tests or start the section, I'm like, I'm having trouble like with reading comprehension. Like, what is going on? Like, I know this is in English, but like, what is happening? That's something that I tell people, like, hey, once you get back started with the test, start like reviewing your questions again from the beginning. So do the first 10 questions, go back, and then from there, you can continue on with your test. So you might want to start this for section one, and you might even want to do this for section three when you get back from your break to kind of reset yourself. Another time you can use this strategy is if you encounter a situation where you're in the middle of section three or four and you're getting towards the end of the test and you're getting like super fatigued and you're just like, I don't even know what's happening. For me, this is kind of where I run into problems also. I get towards the end of the test and I just feel like I'm on autopilot and I'm not really like not really like thinking about the questions anymore. I'm just trying to get it done. If you notice yourself doing that, the number one thing to do is stop, pause, identify that now you're having a problem of being, I call it just being on autopilot. Like, okay, oopsies, we've entered autopilot mode. We're not actually reading the questions thoroughly. Let's take a pause and let's go back. So this is where I also say it's okay to go back 10 questions. See if that's the beginning of where you started to stop like paying attention. So go back 10 questions and then redo those last 10 questions you just did to just kind of be like, okay, am I understanding this? Am I reading it out loud? And when you read this, like, or like, not reading it out loud, like, am I actually understanding what's going on and comprehending it? But reading it out loud is kind of something that I do. Now, obviously, you can't read it like this, like we're talking. You would have to mouth the words. So you'd be like, as long as you're quiet with your mouthing the words, like obviously no sounds coming out. It does kind of like tell your brain though, okay, let's slow this down and let's read this question, understand what's going on. So you can do that at the beginning, just mouthing the words, making sure you're kind of understanding what's going on. Because the big thing is to understand there's words on the screen. What do they mean? Get them in your brain. Um, Unfortunately, reading comprehension is a skill that we're kind of struggling with as a society. So if this is something you struggle with, don't worry, you're not alone. It happens a lot. But if you find yourself just starting to like drift, this is going to be a really good technique to do to help yourself get back on track and then make sure you're not like answering questions and not actually understanding what's going on. So, big thing to recap, guys. This is a strategy that you guys can use if you're one, struggling with the first part of the test to just kind of like get those nerves out of the way and then get back into it. Because one, tons of nerves can throw you off and make you answer questions incorrectly. And then not enough nerves can also throw you off and make you answer questions incorrectly. So you have to kind of maintain this level of like, there's enough anxiety that I'm taking it seriously, but not so much that I'm just paralyzed and I can't even answer the question. It's kind of like there is like they've studied this that there's a certain level of excitement or even like arousal that you have to be at your best to be able to execute things. Like thinking of like a football game or like a basketball game, like those players, they need to be in the zone where they're like, I'm not so anxious and all the way up here, but I'm also not apathetic towards this situation. I'm not like caring about it all. Kind of in that sweet spot where you have enough excitement, but you're not overdoing it. And so if you find yourself drifting out of that range, either too high or too low, pause, go back 10 questions, redo those 10 questions. And you might notice you were making some silly mistakes. Either that it's usually going to be it most of the time, misreading questions. Or misinterpreting what the question is saying. So I really hope that this has been helpful for you guys. Again, this is something that I personally struggle with, so you're not alone, especially if you're somebody who, this has been multiple times taking this test. And if you're but whenever you're watching this, whenever you're observing this, maybe it's getting close to your test date or something like that, and you're trying to figure out a couple things that you can do differently to increase your score before test day. This is something that you can definitely do that isn't going to require any extra studying. So I hope that was helpful, guys. Thank you all for your support, and I will see you guys in the next video/podcast. Bye, guys.